happening. And in verse number 15, there's going to be 4 lines that describe what that picture is. So here is how Issachar is pictured in verse 14. Not too flattering. He is a strong donkey lying down between 2 burdens. And that word can be translated sheepfold, or between 2 heavy satchels. Being pictured as a strong donkey, you may wonder, well, what does that mean? And it may mean, the word strong, also a bony donkey. It can mean that as well. The idea is literally a beast of burden, a labor animal that is being pictured and drawn up by Jacob in his prophecy. Now there's 4 things that are used to describe in verse 15 what this means. 1, he saw that rest was good. 2, the land is pleasant. 3, he bows his shoulder to bear the weight, an unnecessary weight. He bears his burden to be a worker, a weight. And number 4, he becomes a band of slaves, or he is ruled over, becomes a band of slaves. Now, what do these 4 things represent? So the donkey imagery is a manual labor people. And if you study this tribe in the Bible, they never rise past that. Their description is referring not to their look physically, but to their labor as unattractive, bearing a burden, just hard workers, hardened by the labor, as is implied. They love 2 things. They love rest and they love the land. Now, it wasn't bad to love the land because God gives them the land. It was a good fertile land, actually. And they made a good and they made a comfortable living of it. But not only did they love their land, they also loved comfort. And this is what is pictured by laying down between the sheepfolds or the 2 burdens. And again, that one word can be translated several ways, but it means the same thing. Laying down between 2 burdens is this, is that he will rather keep his comfort in labor than he would to risk his discomfort and to follow God. That is pictured by lowering the shoulder to bear a burden, even if it means becoming a band of slaves to other people. And by the way, that's exactly what happened to them. They were submitted to forced labor. They loved the land so much. And one of the things that happens is some of the scholars explicitly state they became servants or vassals to the Canaanites because they wanted to retain their land. So their agreement was, what were they supposed to do with Joshua when they come into the land? Wipe them all out. It's supposed to be yours. These were a wicked people, and in their wickedness, we know some of the things they did. They sacrificed babies into fire to their god Baal. That's just, by the way, they're not much different than the leadership that was in Iran today. They also do the same. They don't burn the children, but they behead them. And then you wear your hijab just a little wrong. They put the women in jail. And if they happen to be virgins, before they execute them, first they rape them so they can be sure not to reach their heaven. It's just a very close ideology to what you had in Canaan. I didn't even mean to go there. That was just bonus. But that is the way that the Canaanites lived. So God said, when you go in there, this is the intention that you are to have. You're to take them all out. You are to own this land. But what did they do? They stopped short of that. They didn't do it. And instead of following God's instruction, what they did was they became servants to the very people that God said, if they remain, they will corrupt your society and your nation. And that's exactly what happened. So they become slaves of others and even paid tribute and taxes to the Canaanites so that they could live in the comfort of just doing manual labor in their land. Don't risk anything, don't lose anything. Well, they lost a lot when they didn't follow Christ. And then comes the prophecy of Dan. By the way, here's the prophetical meaning to us today. It pictures a people who are capable, but their love and comfort and security makes them accept spiritual or moral servitude. And then comes the prophecy of Dan, verses 16 through 18. Well, let's look at what he has to say about Dan. Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper in the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that its riders shall fall backwards. I have waited for your salvation, O Lord. Now, this prophecy about Dan, first of all, is sandwiched in verse 16 and 17 by salvation. Verse number 16, Dan shall judge his people. What that word means is deliver his people. What the judges did in the Old Testament was when Israel was living in sin and they got overtaken by an enemy, they would cry out to God. God would raise up a judge, and the judge would deliver them from the oppression of their enemy. When you get to verse number 18, I've waited for your salvation, O Lord. Again, it is a deliverance that is now accredited to the Lord. And so it begins with a deliverance and it ends with a deliverance imagery. Now, to be a judge, this group had the most famous judge of them all, and he judged Israel for 20 years. He's the stuff of superheroes, and everybody remembers the strong man. His name was Samson. And he delivered Israel from oppression and over, and that is really the fulfillment of verse number 16. He did just that. He delivered his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Now, there's a serpent imagery in between. Now, this is really, when you think about this tribe, you're going to think about a mixture of something good and something bad. Something good and something bad. With Dan, there was no in between. They're doing something super heroic or they're doing something super dumb. The best of the best or the worst of the worst. And this is exactly what you see. It's even pictured in Samson, isn't it? Unprecedented. Were the way his deliverance acts of military against the Philistines. It never happened like that. But how did he live? As an immoral person, ignoring the commandments of God. And the serpent here is pictured in the middle verse number 17. Dan was one of the tribes that did not fully conquer their region. But you know what? When they did conquer a region, they did it robustly. And it's remarkable of how mixed that this is. They won a huge battle against Laish, which was a really strong city, and they went in and they crushed it just like God told them. But you want to know what they did after that? They were the first tribe to bring an idol into Israel. The first tribe. And by Jacob, he's described as a snake, as a snake, but as Moses, as a lion. It's that mixed bag. They either go all in doing something incredibly heroic or all in doing something incredibly dumb. But having it on your resume to be the first to introduce idolatry into a nation, that is not a good place to be. And the subtlety is pictured by the snake. Automatically, and it should, it brings up imagery of Genesis 3, right? Of the serpent who will strike at the heel of the Messiah, but the Messiah's heel will crush the head of the serpent. And in verse number 17, you see the viper in the path snapping at the heels of horses so that its riders will fall backwards. So subtlety is pictured in this. But also with that imagery of the serpent, you see, is also causing people to fall. The riders are falling off the horse with his strike. And in Joshua 18:30, that's the reference. The children of Dan set up for themselves a carved image. And do you remember one of the main reasons of the first deportations? I know it wasn't keeping the Sabbaths, but it was because idolatry had been brought into Israel. And you know what? When they come back from the first deportation, they never set up an idol and worshiped it in the nation again. It cured that. It cured it. Now you get to verse number 18, Jacob has an interjection of hope. Dan may deliver through being a nation of judges, but obviously he's got his problems. But whenever you come to Jacob, he places the hope of deliverance where it should be, in the Lord. That seems out of place. It's not out of place. Because how many times have you heard this phrase, and it's so true, don't put your hope in man, but put your hope in God, right? And God will use men or women in different capacities to do different things to fulfill His will. But as soon as you start looking at that person as the answer to your problems instead of God, well, you may find that they're a snake. Well, hopefully I'm not calling you all snakes, or myself, by the way, just in case you're wondering. The person you got to look at is God, and that is what Jacob is doing, bringing it all back and around. The Messiah will be the better deliverer of Israel, the better deliverer. Prophetically speaking, of course, that speaks of the Messiah who is coming. It's clear as day to see that in that verse, in verse number 18. And I think Dan also represents the mixed message that we send to the unbelieving world with our life, when one minute we follow God and the next minute we're not. People see that. They saw it with Dan. Now here's the grace of God. When you go to Revelation, this tribe is missing from the names of the 144,000, and the reason for that being is because of the idolatry. But when you get into Ezekiel chapter 48, and that is a picture of the millennial, these things that are being pictured in Ezekiel 48 in that area, it places Dan in the millennial in the northern kingdom boundary that he has, from Dan to Beersheba. And his name is placed. That is the grace of God. He messed up. He lost out on participation in Revelation in that last day of evangelism by the nation. But he did not lose his place in eternity. Ezekiel makes that clear. That is the grace of God. And it's a wonderful thing. Next we come to Gad. Verse number 19. What can it be said about Gad? One verse. A troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph in the last. Well, this is what can be said about Gad. Exactly what is being said is what happened. They're invaded and they overcome. They are invaded and they overcome. That is the picture of Gad over and over and over again. Now, the word assault by a troop is a Hebrew word gedud, which means desert people. And they were the eastern boundary for Israel. And so what you would have were nomads like the Ammonites, the Moabites, later on the Syrians, who would repeatedly, there was no buffer. If you were going to get into Israel through the east, through the desert, you went in through the nation of Gad. And they would come in, they wanted the land for plunder because it was fertile, 2 Kings 10, if you want that reference. And therefore, it became sandwiched between the Moabites to the south and just a little bit south, and the Ammonites to the east, and the Arameans to the northeast. It reminds me of Nehemiah, how Nehemiah had Sanballat, Tobiah, and just all around northeast and west. They were just surrounded whenever Nehemiah was trying to rebuild. And these people were always surrounded with those who would invade their country. But this is what the verse says. Although he'll be constantly invaded, he's going to become really tough. He's going to become triumphal. Speaks of initial defeats turning into victories. Now, what happens whenever you have to fight over and over and over and over again? Only one of two things happen. You give up, or you're destroyed, or you get a whole lot tougher, one of the two. And God says you're going to get a whole lot tougher if you hang in there. You're going to go through a lot, but because you go through a lot, you're going to gain a lot from that. Places like 1 Chronicles 5 show that their victories, their triumphs against the Hagrites and other groups show that exactly what was said will end up happening. So how does that speak to you and me prophetically? Well, commentators see this, and I see it, and I think you'll see it as a pattern of the initial setbacks in our Christian walk. You know, there's one person, and I forgot who it was, but I love what he said. When I first got saved, I thought this was the easiest thing in the world. A few days later, I thought, oh, this is the most impossible thing in the world to live for God. And when I learned that walking in the Spirit is the key, I learned that it is the most wonderful thing in the world. And I think that this pictures exactly that. Now, they had a lot of battles that they had to fight, but they became so strong because of these battles and the adversity. And so does the Christian. As they hang in there, they become stronger. Next is Asher. We're coming to an end. Asher, getting close anyway. What can be said about Asher? Verse 20. He'll be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. And the idea of being rich and connecting the food is the idea that his land is going to be yielding superior everything. And it was so. Grain, grapes, produce, fat, plenty, just substance that was going to be better than all the rest. And the area absolutely was known by that. It really took in the Mediterranean climate better than a lot of places. Mediterranean climate is great for that. There's only 2 places in the world that have the climate. That's around the Mediterranean, and Southern California has it too. And now it's got so crazy everyone had to move out. But did you ever wonder why people put up with so much stupidity and such high taxes to live there? It's because of that climate. They loved it. And I went to school there, and I remember one of the things did grow really well there in the rainy season. When I was studying on campus, they had boards that would line the wall, and pergola, that's what I'm trying to say, a pergola. And grapes would just grow over the pergola. And while you were sitting there on the bench with your books on the table reading, all you had to do was just reach up and grab a cluster of white grapes and just start eating them. Everything grew really, really well there. And that is the picture that is being brought forth here of Asher. It says that it's going to be very fertile. It's going to grow very well. As a matter of fact, so much it's going to lead to royal delicacies. And if you read 1 Kings chapter 4, you'll see that these were some who supplied these foods to Solomon's court. If you're Solomon, you want the best. If you want the best, then you go to Asher. That's where you get that. And so prophetically speaking, well, what does this mean to you, and what does this then mean to me? Well, despite their wealth, wouldn't you believe it, it's another tribe that failed to fully drive out the Canaanites. And it usually points to something like this. Doesn't always mean this, but it can mean this. Blessing points out a big risk of complacency. It is the more blessed we are, the more complacent we get about spiritual things oftentimes. Not always, but oftentimes. But one noticeable person from this tribe is in Luke 2:36, Anna the prophetess. You remember her in the temple? She recognized the baby Jesus and said, "This is the Redeemer." Now, Naphtali, verse number 21. What is it about Naphtali? There's only 2 more left after this, so we are on time. He is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words. Now, I bring this up just because some people decide to translate this differently. I think most everybody will see that same thing. Another way people translate it, and they do it only because of this, the Septuagint. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But they would translate it as an oak tree with fruit. That's not correct. This is correct, the way to translate it. That he is a deer that is loose, and he uses beautiful words. So what does this mean? Well, being a deer or hind is the idea. Firstly, they're a mountain animal here, and their area is the hill area, and the very bottom border is Mount Tabor, so they're starting to get into the hills. And one of the things that is very interesting about this tribe, I didn't even realize this until today, even though I've looked at this before, is the only tribe where a northern boundary is not spelled out. In other words, God says you don't have to stop here in the north. It's the only one. And therefore, there seems to be some sort of indication that there is a freedom that is within this group. The hind let loose, the freedom, the mobility, the agility to be able to get around, not being contained, not being within a boundary, so to speak. Moses also gives a similar blessing when he takes his turn in Deuteronomy 33. Because this land would go up and it would flatten out a little bit, get down, or go downhill to the Sea of Galilee. They were west of it. And Moses says this, and of Naphtali, he says, Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full of blessing of the Lord, possess the west, that's the Sea of Galilee, and the south. And so Moses' blessings portray this group of having this upper Galilee territory being abundant because they're able to live off of the sea if they want to. And they also have access to the south. The Hebrew word is Negev. The desert is still called the Negev today. It's not really a desert area, but the bottom part of their land is very fertile, and no matter what you plant there, it just grows, and it does so very well there. And Moses says to them, you are blessed because you have access to the sea. For marine life, you have access to the Sea of Galilee, which is a lake, but you have access as well down to the land where you can grow stuff. You've really got the whole thing. And then Jacob says you have beautiful words. And I don't think that is meant to be graceful words like a deer moving, but the imagery does fit together. But two things I think you can bring out of that phrase. Number one, Deborah and Barak sang a triumphant song. They wrote this song after defeating their enemies in Judges chapter 5, and they are from this tribe. But prophetically speaking, I think it reaches way past that without trying to take it too far, because you can really take things too far. Having more freedom than any other tribe, I think it represents our freedom in Christ. Not freedom to do wrong, but freedom from the law, freedom from wearing the guilt and the burden of having to perform to receive forgiveness. And the most beautiful words ever spoken are called the good news. The good news of the gospel of Christ that we preach every Sunday, and in some measure it fits in every Sunday, every Wednesday, and as we speak to others about Christ, I think it pictures that as the believer. And then we come to Joseph. I on purpose cut down the longest out of all the children because we've spent months on Joseph. I figure you probably know a little bit about Joseph by now. But Joseph, verses 22 through 26, is the longest blessing and benediction given. And verse 22 is depicted as a fruitful bow by a well, how blessed he is currently. Verse 23, how opposition, pictured as archers, are against him, but yet he made it. Verse number 24, he's sustained by God. God is the sustainer, but yet he sustained Joseph. And verse number 25, the abundant blessings, blessings of heaven above, blessing of the deep beneath, blessing of the breast and womb. Joseph and all the blessings are, remember, Joseph is a picture of Christ and has been through Genesis, so that helps you to understand the abundance of blessings that are associated with Christ. And then the superiority even of paternal blessing. He's above all of the rest, and it's all laid on the head of Joseph. And prophetically speaking, he represents the blessings of Christ, the eternal state, the millennial, all the times when Christ has set everything right. Just as Joseph was brought into power under Pharaoh, and he set the world right during the worst time ever, and so Christ, under the Father in complete agreement, comes into the world during the worst time ever, and he makes the world everything that it needs to be. And then Benjamin, the last, verse 27, he's considered as a ravenous wolf in imagery in verse 27. In the morning he'll devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Let me tell you, Benjamin was the toughest tribe you could find. As a matter of, not only is the verse depicting them as that, they excelled in battle. There was a civil war in Israel, and Benjamin by themselves were able to completely resist the first time and almost completely resist the second time. All of the rest of Israel combined. When you think about this group, Judges 3 has somebody named Ehud. Now, if you remember him, he's a left-handed assassin who killed Moab's king, Eglon. That's a good story. Well, not because of the content, but just go back and read it. Judges 3, the left-handed assassin came from this group. And Judges 20 is that civil war where 26 warriors nearly defeated all of united Israel twice because they were fierce warriors. Saul and Jonathan. Saul wasn't a great king, but he was a great warrior. Remember, he would go against the Philistines, and you hadn't seen anything like that and since Samson. And, of course, David would be a great warrior too. But he and his son, Jonathan, they were great, great warriors. They ravaged the Philistines. And then you remember a certain apostle that was from this tribe. His name was Paul. He was a great spiritual warrior for Christ. Now, if you were going to apply this to us today, I think great spiritual warriors who fight through the power of the gospel to conquer sin and to share the good news would be a great benediction that God could give to you. And now we are at Jacob's final instructions, because I really want to get to chapter 50 next week. There's really one big thing that I want to bring out in this, so let's just read through it. He names all the tribes being mentioned in verse 28. And he charges them in verse 29 with this phrase, I'm going to be gathered to my people, bury me with the fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. Now this phrase, be gathered unto my people, has a significant meaning. It was also used of Abraham in Genesis 25 verse 8 that he was gathered to his people. This is not a reference about being close to your family, because he was already close to his family while he was alive. This is not a reference, by the way, people is plural in both instances, of being buried next to the rest of your family either, because when it's used of Abraham in Genesis 25:8, no one else is there except for his wife. But again, that's in the plural. The reference of when he passes on, being gathered to his people, is that God is bringing him into the eternal state with the believers. Those are his people. And things like this are mentioned all through the Old Testament, references of eternal life. One of the best way that Jesus exemplified this was using the examples of Moses. When the Sadducees came to him and said, Sadducees did not believe in an afterlife at all. And so they challenged him on this idea of resurrection. And he brought up the conversation with Moses and the burning bush. And he said, you remember what God said to Moses? I am, present tense, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not I was. Jesus pointing out and indicating that right now at this current time, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are present and conscious, and they are with me. I am their God. I was their God. I am still their God, and they're with me. And Jesus turns around and looks at the Sadducees and says, God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. Abraham and Isaac are alive right now, and they're in eternal glory with the Father. This is just another reference to that. He is gathered into eternal life with the Father. And that's just a great thing I needed to pull out of that after making you listen to the prophecies of all these 12 tribes of Israel. That's his final instruction. Do this and then go bury me back into the area. We'll talk about this more next week. But why were they also concerned about being buried in Canaan? Is because they expected to be resurrected in Canaan in the millennial. And you'll see the reference to that with Joseph next week. All right, we'll come to an end and we'll take prayer requests and then we'll pray.